to Life After Divorce podcast, and I'm your host, Patricia Lavigne, and I'm a separation and divorce coach. I'm so happy that you were here to join us today. I decided to do a 10-week series of 10 people asking questions and 10 questions that they would answer about their experience of divorce. And I feel it's really important for new people to get that experience from people that have been through it, so that they do get some hope and know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. I want to invite Linda. She's our guest today. And welcome, Linda.
Hello.
Hi.
Here we go.
So the questions I've kind of put together for everyone to sort of have their same experiences. The first one was, how long have you been since you've been divorced?
Well, I'm going to go from separated because I was separated from in the year of 2000. I didn't get actually physically divorced for years afterwards, but yeah, so it's been like 21 years.
Okay. And how was your marriage? What was your marriage like?
It was more one-sided than another. There wasn't an equal or sharing experience, poor communication. There was no violence or anything like that. I mean, there was nothing of that nature, but I was married to a very selfish person, if I could say that, who wasn't like sharing and wasn't a big, like, it wasn't, I don't know, it's hard to explain someone like this, how they, deal in a relationship. So whenever there was a communication, it was, well, if it didn't fit his narrative, he would walk away. There would be no further communication. It was very difficult to be in that kind of a marriage with someone.
It's funny you say that because I've heard it a couple of times that the communication line was the biggest problems. Like,
huge. Yeah.
There were others problems, but I think that one was kind of one that really stands out the most. That I don't know if people back in our generation really had the tools to talk and communicate, because my parents didn't communicate. I didn't see any of that. So,
no,
I think that was passed down, right?
And well, in one sense, yes. In another sense, we were two people that were, I don't think I was ready for marriage, to be honest with you. Like, and I had come out of a relationship with someone who I really loved. So it was sort of, he was more a rebound in that sense, but everything just sort of happened too fast. Like, and the next thing you know, I'm at the altar with somebody I don't even know. And I was young, so I didn't even know, like, it's just what you did. You got married, you had kids, you bought a house. Like, it's what you did back then. And I think it's more, you do get a lot of family pressure from that kind of thing. But yeah, I know that I was not ready to be married. And there were a lot of things that came to light. It started before the marriage and continued throughout. And I had no idea that it was in the entire 18 years we were together. So that was kind of mind boggling.
I can imagine. Yeah. So looking back, what would you have done differently?
Not got married.
Not got married at all?
No. Now I think differently. I would have stepped back. I would have gotten my feet well planted on the ground. I mean, I was the one who, didn't want to have a family for the longest time because I wanted to establish myself, in some kind of career before I had family, because I knew once that family came, the career was going to be put on hold. And that was a personal choice for me. No one was taking care of my children but me. But I think if I had to do something differently, it would have been to probably wait a little longer, probably into my later 20s, before I would have made such a big step in life. Because, I mean, the reality is you're with this person for the rest of your life. And I wasn't head over heels for him. It was more of a rebound. So I think I was caught up in a lot of emotions that weren't related to the person I was with.
Mhm.
So, that didn't help matters. But I didn't complicate the marriage as a result of it. I just think that was more of a personal thing where I couldn't, um, I just wasn't fully engaged with the person I was with.
Mhm. And probably wasn't really fair to him, during that marriage, but you didn't do it intentionally, but you just, getting so wrapped into the marriage and didn't realize, and then next thing
Yeah.
you know, you're sort of with someone and you're kind of in it for the long haul, and then things start happening, right? So,
Well, and I think what it is I was the one who was committed to the institution of marriage. I was that person.
mhm.
My spouse was not.
Ah,
It was more of a convenience factor. It was more of, well, if I know she's married and with kids, I know that she's here at home with them. It was more of, I guess, some part of control. Although I wasn't somebody who was easily manipulated or controlled. It was just sort of how things happened.
yeah.
And, and when you're so close to it, you don't even realize, it's like it happens and you blow it off, and then it happens again and you blow it off. But by the second year of my marriage, I knew, sitting across from him, that I was not going to be married to him for the rest of my life. I knew that.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. That was a sort of a pivotal moment for me.
Hmm. And then you stuck it out for all that time after, right? And wow.
I did. Another 16 years. I think the struggle there was my belief in that institution of marriage.
And
Right.
yeah, it's so funny because I've been hearing that with other people that I've been going with these podcasts, and they're kind of like, it's so, it's familiar to hear the stories because
Mhm.
some of the stories are similar, and it's just, I don't know if it was the generation or, like you say, the pressure of the parent forcing you to get married, or maybe just, getting out of the house, or I don't know, but it seems like those are sort of the patterns of other people as well. Now, if you thought back, after you separated, what, do you think that you should have reached out for some help or some support to get through your separation and divorce? Or did you get support or help, or how was that process?
There was really none available to me. Well, I can't say that. I didn't know what was available to me. Let's just put it that way. And
Mhm.
I think most people think that's a lawyer.
Ah, you're right.
And so the minute you hear lawyer, you hear dollar signs, and you're in the midst of a financial struggle because you're battling over, you know, assets and, you know, children and, all this kind of stuff. And there's too much going on with you to realize that there could be other ways or other people or other services available to you,
Hmm.
and I had none. And being one of the first people in our realm of friends to divorce, no one had divorced.
Hmm.
Not even in the family. There were no real divorces in, my cousins or my, people that you could relate to of your age group, in particular. So there was no one to talk to regarding this stuff. There was no one to around for me. I just sort of, winged it alone.
How did
And
that
I
show?
mean, yeah, it was pretty, that was one of the biggest things in my life that was hard, like super hard, because you couldn't, I mean, I always love to have somebody to bounce things off of, like, okay, I'm, here, this is what's going on. And, that guy's jackass or whatever. I need somebody to tell me, well, you're being a bit of a jackass yourself. Right.
Mhm.
So, and then you can be that person because you're in the moment and you're heated and angry and whatever. But the reality is had to step back and I had to think about things, and especially like overnight. And then you have someone that is, pressuring you and threatening you to take your children and get full custody. And so that's playing on you and it's impacting you. And I knew it would never come to light, but I always knew too that I was never going to put her in the middle of the two of us.
Right.
So it was pretty hard to sort of make sense of all of that while you're going through all those emotions,
Right.
because it is a big emotional pull back and forth, and you get angry and you get mad and you get sad and you get hurt, and yeah, there's a lot going on, and you've got to sort through it all to make sensible decisions.
Yeah, and that's why I do. That's one of the reasons why I reach out to clients to coach them, because I do hear all that, and I do, like to keep them aligned into what's the best business decisions to make in the best interest for them and your
Mhm.
future. Because when you're not thinking straight, you're just
Mm-mm.
reacting, and you're not really
Yep.
focusing on what's the best thing for tomorrow. And I find that I get that a lot with my clients. So you're absolutely right. How did your children react to it? You said you have your daughter, right?
Oh my God, it killed her.
Mm-hmm.
That it was okay, cat, move. You can hear my cat in the background. She's bugging me because I'm talking. She
Yeah.
hears somebody here. Um, that was probably one of the hardest things, and probably one of the reasons it took me longer than it should have to actually leave,
Mhm.
because I was thinking about her. And in, hindsight, if I would have done it when she was younger, it might have made things a little more normal for her,
Mhm.
that it wouldn't, I mean, they still go through some kind of trauma, but the older they get, the more I think they internalize that trauma to be part of their responsibility when it really has none on them.
Mhm.
So that was pretty difficult. She really felt that, it was her, like her whole world collapsed. He put her on a pedestal, and after that divorce, it was a bitter, bitter, bitter battle. And I had to stay neutral. I had to stay calm. I could never show that emotion in front of her, even though he was like reacting the way he was. So it made it really super difficult to maintain that balance. And I used to say all the time, oh, I just wish he'd get a girlfriend. And then he would leave me alone, because for 5 years he still wanted to get back together. And I used to say, oh, I just wish he'd get a girlfriend. I just, then he would leave me alone, and, that we wouldn't have this struggle. And that was what I was putting into my own head. Well, when he got a girlfriend, he left both of us alone. He even left his daughter alone. She
Oh,
became she became an afterthought to him. She was no longer, put on that pedestal, and it really impacted her in a big way. He'd be on the phone to her, for instance, and, the girlfriend would be calling in. He'd say, oh, I got to go. My girlfriend's calling. Worst thing you could ever do to your kid is do that.
yeah.
Absolute worst thing. And that used to hit her self-esteem so much. She got depressed. At 9, she got depressed. She was like that for probably 3 or 4 months, where you could physically see the depression in everything, just in her waking being. And then I think as she went to school and started, gaining a few more friends, and she sort of came out of that, but it made it very difficult for her. And I tried not to. I tried everything to just keep her out of it. And it was just between the two parents. But no matter what you do, they internalize it.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that message is really, really important to get out there for parents to understand that the kids do go through just as much difficulty as the
Mhm.
adults. And that's why it, again, and I've said this before, where it's so important for the adults to get their life together, get some solid ground, get a foundation. And, because the more that you delay your life, it puts a big, big strain on the kids. So I really appreciate you saying that, because that's a good message to get out there. So what was the biggest challenge you came across after the divorce? Do you remember about that? Like, what was the biggest challenge for you?
Well, I knew for me that I would bounce back. It was just a matter of time. I took my time. I took the year to get my life back. So it was going back and working, getting back into the work world, um, you know, the corporate piece. I knew how to do that very effectively, and I had a good solid foundation before I left the corporate world. So that piece sort of came along just sort of matter of factly. It was sort of one of the daily tasks that I did. But I think one of the hardest things would have been, where do you live?
Mhm.
Which I wanted to live. I didn't want to leave the area. I wanted to be close to her father. I thought that was important, that if I was close enough to her school and her father, she would feel less disconnected
Mhm.
in that regard.
And did that
Um,
help?
pardon me?
And did that help her?
No, because he was doing everything he can to stall me moving on with my life. That we didn't settle on the house where we should have in May. We didn't settle until a week before school was in. And so therefore I had no choice but to move away and, 100 kilometers away to live with my parents, and where I knew she would at least have that emotional stability.
Mhm.
So that was I think that was the hardest piece, was just settle the assets, like stop this fighting and, going back and forth with lawyers. That's all crap. That's all stuff that your kids see, and it affects them. And every time you badmouth the mother or you badmouth the father, that affects the kid, because they are part of each of you.
Mhm.
So I never did that in front of her ever. If I had to do that, she was gone away somewhere. She was not in the house, in the room, or around me when that went on. So, because you do have your moments where you need to vent out some stuff,
Mhm.
just to get it out. And then, but I never ever did that in her presence. And I did that specifically because, I wanted her to have a good relationship with her father. And I knew if I was bad mouthing him or his family or whatever it was, that made it more difficult for her to have that relationship. And in all fairness, she needed to make up her own mind, who he was, and
I
to see
agree.
who he was based on how he reacted and how he acted and how he interacted with her and with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and then, and there was a lot of things. I had a lot of really bizarre things happen. Him pulling at her at a school early, not telling anybody. Like, there was all kinds of shifty and shady things going on that never should have happened. It had my mom nervous. My mom would pick her up. She wouldn't be at school. The school would say, "Oh no, she was gone earlier." I'm like, "What are you talking about? There's no one else there." He would come up early and pick her up and take her out of school and not tell anybody.
Yeah.
So, like, there was a lot of really bizarre things that happened in, our, I guess, settlement of all of this stuff. Even though we had settled, the assets, we had settled. He had 3 weekends a month with her because I did move away. I was still fair about that, but it just seemed that he was always trying some way to dig or get at me, and that was one way to do it. So it wasn't fair to her. It wasn't fair to us. Because now I'm frantic thinking, oh my God, has somebody abducted my child? Well, meanwhile, it's her father.
Mhm.
Just silly things like that I think that parents need to put their crap away, and they need to just, deal with it as a business arrangement.
Mhm.
And then, you know what? You come together for that kid, no matter what. I don't care if you hate each other. Come together for the kid. Be there, be cordial, no name calling, no yelling, no anger. All of that has to leave. You just come together for the child.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I really appreciate your input because that's the message that I try to get out there for a lot of people. So yeah, you're absolutely right. How long did it take to finalize your divorce? I know you said you separated, but how long was when you started the divorce process, how long did it take?
It took about 6 months. Um, he wouldn't help me financially with any of it, which is fine, but he didn't delay the process. He just let the process happen. So, which was good. That just happened. And it was, for me, it was more of a formality. If we were talking about, how long did it take for us to finally, let each other be, that took many years. It took many, many years. And it was because, I was told, well, no, I should be on welfare. I shouldn't be working. I should be on welfare. I shouldn't be working because I have a child. I should stay home. And no, I'm sorry, but that's not happening. I'm going to work. I'm going to provide for my daughter. And that's the way it is. So, um, there were a lot of things where there was a need for him to try and control me and my life. And I used to have to always put those brakes on and say, we're no longer married. Stop thinking of us as married. We aren't married. We live in separate residences. We share a daughter.
Mhm.
And that's the only topic that we're going to be discussing. And I had to limit it and pull it in and structure it, and just not answer any of the other stuff or not react to any of the other stuff, except for in the case of taking the kid out of the school. Well, okay, I did react, but again, not in her presence. Um, there were a lot of other things that happened. And I want to touch on that financially. He renewed a mortgage with my name on it, and I was not on the deed.
Mm.
I signed off on the deed. So it affected me trying to buy my house. So the house I'm in right now, the bank asked me if this was a second mortgage, and I went, what? Um, there was no second mortgage. He had renewed his mortgage about 8 months earlier with my name still attached to it, and bragged about that to me, that, oh, I got a mortgage for such a good rate. And, oh, well, that's awesome. And meanwhile, I had no idea I was still on the mortgage, but not on the deed. So another thing to think about is when you're divorcing, people become people you don't recognize, and they will do things that you would never dream possible. And that happened to me on more than one occasion. And that mortgage thing was one of them. I could have sued the bank. I could have sued my ex. I could have went full guns on this. Um, so, I mean, instead I just said, you get my name off it. If you don't get my name off it in a week, I will be going to court. So, there's some things that can happen, and you have to make sure that all the bills are separated, all they're in one name or the other, not both. Um, you don't want to get yourself into a situation like that. I would have been responsible for the mortgage had he not made his payments. And I would have had no recourse to sell the house because my name was not on the deed. So, and the bank was none the wiser. It was weird. It was just a really weird situation, but, um, you know, it can happen. And, that's just part of the sneakiness of him. And that was sort of something that's who he was. That was a piece of who he was that I really didn't know or think could have been possible when we were married, let alone after divorce. Like, once you divorce and you leave somebody, they can turn, they can be a completely different person altogether that you wouldn't recognize.
Mhm.
Um, I just, it's hard. You have to take care of yourself. And again, I didn't have sort of, you can go to a lawyer, but a lawyer's just looking out for your assets, and they're looking out for custody of your child. They're not really looking out for your emotional well-being.
Mhm.
They're not looking out for your future, where are you going to go? How are you going to progress? There's nobody there doing that. So you're kind of navigating this boat that seems to be like, hitting these storms every time you try and move forward, and you're just getting splashed back, and you end up, back at shore. So
And when you
it's a
say that, it's so true because again, this is why people come to me because
mhm,
they have no emotional support and all their
none.
friends are just telling them, oh, just leave them, just move on. And then that relationship with the friendship kind of gets strained because they're expecting you to do what they want you to do, which when you open up to a friend, right? And it's not always the right decision. It's probably going to get there at some point, but you have to be ready and prepared emotionally,
Yeah,
physically, emotionally, financially. There's a whole steps that you have to get through in order to get to making some solid decisions. It's not just
yeah,
today that you can make them, right? You got to plan for
exactly.
it.
Yeah, exactly. So my thing was, okay, so I'm not living at my parents' forever. My next step is I need to find my own place. Well, how do I do that? I need income, so I get the job.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of went about it. But again, like, not everybody can think clearly when you're under duress.
Mhm.
So, you get so caught up, and if stuff keeps coming at you, like, and stuff came at me for years, like stuff came at me for 5+ years, almost every day.
Wow.
And you had to just step back from it and just say, I'm not, you don't respond to that. That doesn't need a response. As much as the goading was there, you have to pick and choose what it is. And so if it was related to my daughter, those are the only things I would answer. And that seemed to settle down a lot of the other stuff. Although it still kept happening, it still kept coming because it was just this pressure of manipulation. Um, and I just kept focusing on, this has nothing to do with my daughter. This has nothing to do with my daughter. I'm not reacting and I'm not responding.
But that having no support, you're a very strong lady because I mean, not everybody could do it alone, right? So you're very
Well,
strong. You get it.
I was fortunate because my mom, like, we could talk to my mom like our entire lives about anything that was going on in our lives. And she would be there and listen. She's an awesome listener. And like, I remember her saying one time when I left, and we were walking around the bay here or something. And she said to me, your generation's smart. She goes, we were dumb, because she stayed, right? She
Oh,
was
okay, yeah.
just because they stayed, that's what they did. You didn't leave, you just stayed, and you put up with so much stuff. And she had, she didn't have the easiest marriage either. But, just with that whole thing, that said a lot without saying a whole lot, without using a lot of words.
Mhm. So with your advice, what advice would you offer some people who are going through a divorce? What would you say from your experience? What advice would you give them?
Don't trust your ex to be the person you expect them to be, because that's never going to happen. They're looking out for their interests, not yours. You're no longer part of their interests. You've now pushed them away, shunned them away. They're not going to do anything that is worthwhile in your life. Um, absolutely do not involve your children in your marital discussions, in any of those kinds of decisions. It has nothing to do with them. And you need to reassure them. I used to reassure my daughter all the time that it wasn't her, that it wasn't her. This is between your father and me. And sometimes people can't live together. And I remember her playing with me out in the yard, and we were tossing a baseball back and forth. And she was thinking, she was 9, and she turned to me and she just said, Mom, Dad must have done something really bad to get you to leave.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
I just sat there just sort of stunned. How do you respond to something like that? Right. And again, it took me a few seconds. Like, sometimes you have to step back and just stay quiet and think about it and say, well, that's between your father and I. And it had, again, every single time I would say to her, it had nothing to do with you. We both wanted you. We both loved you. You're part of each of us, but, we just can't live together as adults,
Mhm.
and just sort of left her with that. But it bothered her until she was old enough. I never came forward with anything to her about, what had happened or why or any of that. But she wanted some answers as an adult. And I didn't feel that, that I could that I should not tell her certain things. And I did. I just sort of took it upon myself to say, well, there were situations that made it very difficult for me to stay. And here's why. um, you know, I wasn't prepared to live this way. And, but as an adult, I never would say anything to her. Even as a teenager, she never knew anything. But as in her 20s, when she started asking questions and, very honest questions, I gave her very honest answers. And that was the one thing that she would tell all her friends, and she would tell my mom all the time, was, my mom always tells me the truth. Whether it's hard or not, I will tell her the truth. And you have to do it on a level they can understand. So, when her question was, well, dad must have done something bad, I couldn't tell her, yes, he did, and this is what he did. I just said, well, sometimes adults, we can no longer live together. And for her, that was enough.
Mhm.
To hear that was enough. That sometimes, people, they grow out of affection for one another. So, it was one of the things that she could understand at her age, at that level. And it was enough for her, without having to go into the nitty gritty details of, your dad is a philanderer or whatever the case may be. Or your mom, would never sit still and she was dating all kinds of guys. And, I mean, it happens on both sides of that fence. But it was just, you have to talk to the kids on a level they can understand. And you can't badmouth that other parent, because when you badmouth that other parent, you're badmouthing that child, because they are 50% of each of you.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you 100%. Totally, totally agree. So, how long after your divorce did it take for you to get your life back into order? Like to sort of get yourself together, like, and feel that, okay, now I'm living my life.
Well, I knew that I had to take the first year to, get myself together and figure out my plan and what I was going to do. I bought a house while I was still living at my parents', and I had tenants in it. So I figured, okay, so one day I'll move into that home. Um, but it probably happened because my daughter wanted a cat and my parents didn't like animals. They didn't want animals in the house. So that second year I was there, I actually moved into my house. Um, and it sort of started from there. Um, and then it was just her and I, and things were, it was pretty good. Like we were doing our thing. She was going to school. She was making new friends in a new city, which again was hard, but at least she had the emotional supports here.
Mhm.
While I was working, my father would drop her off at school and my mom and dad both pick her up in the afternoon. And, so she had that emotional support. And it was good for me too, because I knew that I didn't have to worry about how she getting home from school and, all of that. I knew that they would be there for her. So that was great, to have that piece in there. But it basically happened for me in the second year. That's when things sort of came together. And um, Lindsay and I moved out into our own house.
Mhm. And if there's one thing that you could have done differently, what would have that been? If you look back, if there was one of, I'm sure there's more than one, but if you could pick one thing, what would you have done differently?
Well, if I could pick one thing, with relation to what? The divorce itself
Whatever you feel.
or just anything?
Yeah, any
I
experience.
think I think again, it would have been to take the time to make sure that I was ready before I got into, you know, a relationship where I was going to be married. I mean, I was always, as a young teenager, I always had boyfriends of 2 years at a time or whatever. But I think once you leave a situation, you need time. You have to give yourself that time. You can't just jump into the next one and jump into the next one. I think that holds true when you become an adult because you got to leave that baggage behind. You got to deal with some of that baggage and just leave it behind before you go into that next relationship. And I think that was probably one of my biggest mistakes was I wasn't really free and clear of all of that. And it actually took me 10 years to get free of that other relationship, that other guy who, if he had walked back into my life at any time with the first 10 years that I was with my husband, I would have left my husband right there, right then and there.
Wow.
So it was for me, I should have taken that step back and until I was actually ready to be in a relationship with somebody new. So it just came too fast. I had moved from out west to Toronto and next thing you know, I meet this guy and his sister was pressuring him to propose to me. And within 2 months, there was a proposal. Like it just came way too quick. And I was still on this emotional roller coaster. So, and I just sort of like went with it like, wow, everything was just happening so quickly. So I think if I had to go back, it would be to step back, just make sure that I was emotionally ready to be in go for that next step in my life.
And our last question, is there anything more that you would like to tell us about your experience that you can offer to someone else?
If you can find someone like Patricia that could help you work through some of the more emotional and physical pieces that can guide you out of, and in the right direction, I would have loved to have had that person. A third person, somebody who really isn't part of the family, is somebody who can be objective. They don't know you, they don't know him, they don't they don't know your kids, but they have everybody's best interests at heart and what would make sense moving forward. Because the reality is 10-year divorce battles in court are not worth it for anybody. It's just a whole bunch of stress nobody needs. It's a whole lot of money that you're just paying lawyers. It makes no sense, in my opinion. I would rather have put my money towards somebody who could say, okay, here's a plan. Let's put a plan together. Let's work through this. Where do you want to be? And put the steps in there and help you get to those steps. Because if you're by yourself like I was, you don't have the emotional support. Friends don't want to hear all your garbage. They really don't. You might have one really good friend that'll sit and listen, but eventually everybody gets tired of listening. And they want to start seeing you doing and, pulling yourself out of, this whole thing. And I mean, if you have that available to you, absolutely, it's probably the best money you could ever spend.
You're right. Yeah, I agree with you. And that's why I do what I do. And I want to reach out to as many people as I can to help them get through it a lot quicker and knowing that the problems that other people faced. And this is an example of these podcasts, is to show people that I want you to hear what these people are, what they're saying and the stories. It's really important to pay attention to. And it's just more support, right, for them. So.
No, absolutely. You need the support. That's probably the emotional support. You need probably more than the financial, in my opinion. I mean, finances will come. They will come. You lose money, you can make more money, but emotional support, like if you lose it and you keep losing it, you're going to end up in a depression if you keep dwelling and, oh, what about this and what about that? And things could have been better. You know what? It's the past. keep moving forward and, find someone who can help guide you out of it.
Mhm. Well, thank you very, very much, Linda. I really appreciate your participation and appreciate all your input. It was very, very valuable. And I would like others to join me for the next podcast to hear other people's stories and experiences that they dealt with and what they were going through for their divorce, because again, I really feel it's important. So, and one thing I'd like to add is, as I always say, is remember that there is a life after divorce.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.